What if you could think and remember like one of the Mentat in Dune? I'm talking about the vast recall abilities and analytical precision that is enough to make mere mortals like me drool over the possibilities, but I want to do so, and I want to help you do so, in a way that is actually possible, that's scientific, and draws upon my years of experience teaching, studying, and using the ancient art of memory myself. And obviously, we can't become like fictional characters, but using our imagination, we can get quite close, and all without becoming, seduced by some of the problems of evil. We can aspire to the level of the best of humanity, and it is very, very useful to try and put our imaginations to the task so that we actually could follow the steps that we would use to produce the neuroplastic possibilities that really do exist. And all we need to explore that and actually feel those results is to learn the various systems of human memory, human thinking, and how to optimize them. And that will lead to an incredible adventure indeed, even if it only gets us partway to the fictional description of what it's like to be a Mentat. So what's the first thing that we're going to do? Well, if I take inspiration directly from how I interpret what happens in this story, we need to know our baseline. So how do you know your baseline? What does that even mean? Well, from what I remember in the story, the Mentats are generally chosen young. They're based on their innate potential. And this suggests that before they even start their training program, someone knows where that individual candidate stands. And so to get your baseline when it comes to memory, if we just focus on that first, you want to work out three things, I think. The first is, how many spaces can you recall, spatial locations, how many words, and how many digits? And this is really, really important because, well, in the free course that I give on the Magnetic Memory Method headquarters, the mothership, you get worksheets that help you test the spatial locations in your life. And one of the reasons why that exercise program is there for you is to help you start to expand your existing spatial memory, but with a mind to mental computation based on the alphabet. And this is super useful for developing the ability to memorize more words and more numbers, because you want to be able to develop those locations that you remember into what are called memory palaces. And you'll need them later on in your Mentat training program. Okay, if you're new to the memory palace technique, what that is a mental recreation of a space that you're familiar with. Now, you can use fictional spaces. That's a special topic for a different time. But basically, we're just going to put associations based on the alphabet in space. Like right here for Mentat, I could have the word Mentos, or the image Mentos. What was that Foo Fighters song, Big Me, I think, where it wasn't Mentos, but they had Futos, and I could think about Futos and how it's a parody of Mentos to get to part of the mnemonic association that I need. And I could have my knowledge of Sanskrit, the word tat in the phrase tatwam asi, thou art that. I could have those things together. And in fact, using the full memory palace technique in its alphabetical rendering, I wouldn't use this place. I would use the apartment of my former roommate Michael in Berlin, because his name starts with M. So now we have M, the image of Mentos, and then we have this Sanskrit phrase tat, Mentat. And that's basically how it works. But if you don't have memory techniques yet, you can still get your baseline. So one way to do that is to use the International Association of Memory Software. It's free. It will give you lists of words and numbers along with a timer. And even without memory techniques, you could just see how many of these can I remember within a certain time limit, and that will give you a baseline. And baselines are really, really useful for tracking your progress over time and being very analytical about how that you're developing your memory. But keep in mind, this kind of memory development activity based on your baseline is not divided from logical thinking. You're going to practice logic by how that you study and practice the memory techniques. And this is really important to understand. A lot of people sort of don't get this about the memory techniques. It is something that used to be called ars combinatoria, or the art of combination, and it is mixed with what was called ars memorativa, or the art of memory, the technique of memory. And when you combine these two things together, you're able to not only remember better, but to mentally compute things through combination. Okay, so that leads us to the next step, which is to develop a number of mnemonic systems. So I've already talked about how you can start to develop your recall of locations and think about them in a combinatorial way, because the exercises in the free course at magneticmemorymethod.com allow you to complete this alphabetically. A for me is Adam. I have a friend. I have another friend named Andy. I have another friend named Alistair. I can use all those locations to form memory palaces that are based on the letter A. And I have a friend whose middle name is Xavier. Well, that's an X memory palace. I used to work for a guy when I was a janitor in a movie theater named Zoltan. Well, that's a Z memory palace. You may not have a memory palace for every letter of the alphabet to begin, but that's one of your mnemonic systems that you want to start to develop. An alphabetical memory palace network. And since the hallmark of the Mentat is perfect recall, by developing that mnemonic system, you will be becoming a guardian of wisdom who practices the ancient art of memory. But there are other mnemonic systems you want to add in as well. These have been refined over thousands of years, but actually they're pretty much essentially unchanged from how they were used by people like Aristotle, Giordano Bruno, and Robert Flood. And they are used by memory competitors to this day. And the only real difference is that usually the memory competitors don't remember what it was that they memorized 5 minutes after the competition, right? So we want not only those systems, but a system for long-term retention, because we're trying to be like the Mentat, not the competitors, right? So just to reiterate, you want the memory palace, or what is sometimes called the method of loci, or sometimes pronounced the method of loci. And this technique is helping you associate information with vivid mnemonic images and spatial reference points at the same time, like having Mentos and Tatwam Asi from Sanskrit in Mishael's apartment. So to just get familiar with this technique right now, bring a location to mind. It could be a childhood bedroom. It could be your current workplace. It could be a seat on a bus. And then pick something from the world that you want to memorize and start placing a strange association based on how that word or the thing you want to memorize sounds and is spelled. So I'll give you another example since I'm thinking of Michael in Berlin. Teufelskreis, or the Devil's Circle. I always loved that word in German. It is something where you could imagine a giant toe-shaped toy felling a tree while the toy is crying. Toy, felling a tree, crying. Teufelskreis. There's really no knack to coming up with these associations, but there are training steps to follow so that it becomes second nature for you. And if you would love to have this skill of association become second nature for you, get subscribed if you're new here. We take deep dives into these mental skills. And for the love of memory, hit that thumbs up. For the love of thinking more logically, hit that thumbs up. And let's train the robots to remember that we humans are on the path to becoming more and more like Mentats, so consciousness can populate space, maybe. In any case, this is what the Magnetic Memory Method project is all about, and I go through lots and lots of ins and outs about how to craft proper mnemonic associations. Now, there are also number mnemonics, and there is the long-term memory system, which I call recall rehearsal, and it's based on spaced repetition and active recall. Those are all well-evidenced terms that scientists have used to show just how well these memory techniques work when they're used in particular ways. So where you get started is totally up to you, and one of the problems with memory training is that there's too many places to start. But if you just want a simple passage into, say, a number system, explore something like number rhymes or the number shape system. And, a very simple example of number rhyme is 1 is a bun, 2 is a shoe, 3 is a bee, etc. Then if you had a list of things you wanted to memorize, you would have, for Mentat, the word itself, you would have like a bun wrapping around a Mentat character in Dune, or you would have a bun wrapping around Mentos to help you remember that sound of Mentat. Or if it was Teufelkreis as the second word, you would have something like this toe in a shoe, but the toe in this case is the devil, to help you remember that Teufel is devil, and he could be running around in circles to remember that Christ is circle, and he could perhaps have some sort of Christ-like image which is close to Christ. In any case, that's a number rhyme system. 1 is a bun, 2 is a shoe, etc. Or if it was a number image system, you could just have 1 being a candle, and that would now be in the hands of the figure, etc. There are so many mnemonic systems, so many variations on them, but these are the basics, and you want to dive into them, own them completely, and always, always, always think of them as being logical, because when you think of them logically and you use associations on the basis of sound and image and meaning association levels, well, then you're going to practice the next step, which is logical thinking and mental computation. So the Mentats perform these really fast, lightning calculations, and they make decisions very, very quickly. Something that you can learn to improve by exploring mental math routines, but also making sure that you learn a variety of mental models. So there's many, many ways to do this. I would suggest that you study classical logic, but also non-classical logic, and then also practice a little bit of humility. Never be too sure, never be too sure, never be too sure. And I repeat that for a reason, one of which is that I'm quoting Gary Halbert, who said that 3 times to really, really drive that home. Because there are a lot of people who go around with absolute 100% certainty. This happened on one of my recent videos where somebody said that Aristotle invented logic. And I came back at him and he said, well, he coined the word logic. And I'm just thinking, in my way of rotating information around in my brain, that doesn't gel with my reading of Aristotle in the metaphysics. Not only is the word logic not exactly the word that's used here, at least according to this translation, which has notes on the origin of the word logic, but also Aristotle creates a history, and he's actually very inclusive, so to speak, of the other people who used logic. So how he could, invent logic is beyond me, but that person was not particularly intellectually charitable about that, and I don't know why exactly, but it's not like it's the only book by Aristotle that I've read, and I just find it very, very strange that someone would say that Aristotle invented logic. So I'm dwelling upon this in our Mentat training program because you can't afford to make mistakes like that. And if you do make such a mistake, you need to have heuristics that help you run mental simulations, one of which is, what if I am wrong? If somebody is telling me that they don't think Aristotle invented the word logic, instead of doubling down and saying, well, he at least coined the phrase or the word logic, you might say, I'm sorry, what is it that you know about Aristotle and the history of logic? And then that person may say, well, if you look at this particular translation and you read the errata on it, you'll see that actually that's a very, very contentious claim to make. These kinds of mental simulations help you test the exact nature of the knowledge flowing through your brain and the brains of others. And it leads to much better conversations for everybody, because the Mentat idea is that you not only deal better with criticism in the world and all that sort of stuff, but you raise all ships. You become the highest possible version of yourself. And this highlights another issue. There's a difference between critical thinking skills and simply following preferred mental models. And this raises a point that I think is very, very important, because there's a difference between true logical thinking, critical thinking, and just following preferred mental models. So yes, we need to learn mental models, but we can't have favorites. Because if we get into habits and patterns of just using the same mental models over and over again without expanding continually to mentally rotate through all the mental models we possibly can, we're going to get a history of impoverished results. And it's not not right. It's not good. We need to continually have more and more mental models and rotate through them as much as we possibly can. And so if we think about the art of memory and the art of combination, some people used to use memory wheels. And there's a big history about that. One of the reasons why they developed is because a guy whose name people argue about the pronunciation, but it's Ramon Lull. Commonly we pronounce that. The point is that he developed these memory wheels partly to help people in their minds rebut objections to a particular religion that Lull wanted to have spread around. And so they would combine all kinds of responses to various arguments in their mind and be able to forward them very, very quickly. So we don't necessarily have to use memory wheels. I encourage you to learn what they are, to explore them, to experiment with them. But at the end of the day, my larger point is that whether you put mental models on memory wheels or not, you need to continually expand, explore, experiment with, and apply a variety of mental models without getting caught up in your likes or dislikes, preferences for particular ones, because that's moving in the opposite direction of critical thinking. There's a phrase in Sanskrit I love that talks about how we need to kill the like-dislike monster. Is it a monster like one of the sandworms in Dune? I think the like-dislike monster is even worse. And remember, fear is the mind killer. So don't go in fear of your preferences. Make sure to think through them with multiple mental models. Now, the next thing we want to do is optimize our attention and focus. And as I read the Dune books, the mind of a Mentat operates like a laser, not a floodlight. We need to really develop various forms of meditation protocols, ideally meditations that help us fuse together different kinds of concentration. So for example, in my book, The Victorious Mind, I share a habit stack that involves 4 to 5 different types of meditation in one daily ritual, depending on how you count these rituals. And some of them are called number skipping, and some of them involve reciting long-form mantras that have been memorized in memory palaces. What they do is they help train and focus the mind to stick with a particular activity for longer. And that helps reduce the impulse to multitask when working on other activities. Now, there's some science that shows that working on more than one thing at a time actually fragments your working memory. And in my experience, there's only one exception to the rule, and that's when I memorize names at events. And I really do have to do a kind of mental multitasking, because as new names are coming in, as people announce themselves throughout the room, I have to work with these images and I have to sort of bounce back and forth in order to produce a good demonstration of reciting all those names. But that said, we definitely want to train ourselves in very, very focused ways, and also go in caution of some of the standard popular techniques like the Pomodoro technique, which, it leads to a kind of condition for many people that actually has your focus interrupted at regular intervals. If you don't know Pomodoro technique, it's, like the idea of having a little tomato timer on your desk, and then you read for 15 minutes, and then it rings and it gives you a break. Well, do you really want to train yourself to be interrupted from reading at 15-minute intervals? Your mileage may vary, but I've preferred developing my own ideas for when it's time to take a break by extending my focus as long as possible, but also the opposite, allowing my focus to last just as long as it lasts. Nicholas Luhmann, who was a major innovator of what's called the Zettelkasten, which is a kind of note-taking, he said that he would not study or write any longer than he felt engaged. And he wrote many, many books, and he studied many, many things. But he would take a break according to the pattern that worked for him, not conditioning himself to work like a machine according to a clock. And I've found this to be right in my own practice. And over time, I've extended how long that I can focus for most tasks. I can write much longer than I ever used to be able to do with a reasonable degree of quality, and I can read for much longer. Now, I do still take breaks, and I use a form of break taking called interleaving, which very briefly is if I'm spending 15, 20 minutes reading this book naturally, not with a timer, whatever amount of time that I'm taking, I will then stop when I feel I'm getting a bit of topic exhaustion or entertainment exhaustion for that matter, and then I'll switch to another book and read for 10, 15, 20 minutes, maybe longer, of some Aristotle, and then maybe I just switch to a different Aristotle book, and on and on and on. And that interleaving has been shown in studies to improve retention, and it also just helps you avoid topic exhaustion. And you don't have to time it. You already know that you're going to spend the next hour going through 4 or 5 different books. Anyway, there's a lot to explore with interleaving, so I have material about it. If you're interested, just generally keep this in mind. We want to improve our focus, our concentration, but beware of technologies, even if they're simple timers, that might take you in the wrong direction. They might de-skill the skill that you need in order to go in the direction of Mentat mind. Related to focus and concentration is mental endurance and stress resilience. Now, since Dune is fiction and drama is the name of the game, obviously Mentats are operating under extraordinarily high levels of pressure and threat. But we also are in the real world, and we need to develop endurance by practicing under extremes of cognitive load. So let's say that you really get into testing your memory and you're using something like words to practice with, numbers, and you want to increase the challenge. Well, something that I learned from my friend and 3 times USA memory champion John Graham is what he calls chaos training. And to engage in it, what you do is you return to your baseline exercise and you memorize words and numbers, either just trying to remember them or using mnemonics while listening to loud heavy metal or some other form of distraction. John told me that he puts on the television, he lets his kids run around while memorizing playing cards, and to make it even more challenging in that environment, he starts doing push-ups as part of the card memorization practice protocol. Now, even if doing these kinds of additional things, adding these distractions reduces your results during practice, it should improve your results during real-world applications. And I've seen this myself. I did an experiment recently where I listened to a heavy metal song while memorizing German words, and it just makes my baseline without any kind of distraction much, much better because of that extra heavy lifting. And more on that experiment is coming, so be sure to follow this project if you aren't already, if you want to be notified when I drop my results from some of the chaos training experiments that I've been documenting and recording, and I hope you'll find it a lot of fun. I've certainly had a lot of fun putting it together for you. Now, beyond this, resilience comes from the things we almost all know: sleep, diet, regular fitness sessions that challenge your muscles, your respiratory system, and your balance. Keep yourself hydrated, continually test your diet for issues, and just generally become concerned about your physical well-being, because as far as we know, the brain is actually a physical thing, and it is the machine that produces your mind. So at some level, the quality of your cognition comes from your physical body. The next step is important because memorizing can be fun, but the Mentats don't just consume stuff for the sake of memorizing it. They contemplate what's in their memory and they relate the information. And part of the way that it's possible for you to be good at relating information is by using the interleaving principle I introduced you to and constantly rotating through multiple topics. And you can use the magnetic memory method protocol for autodidacticism so that you have time in order to rotate through multiple topics. But at the end of the day, what you want to do is have long-term mental mastery through contemplation, through questioning, through analysis. And what you want to do is follow a daily practice regimen that has some sort of writing involved, where you use the active recall principle of calling the information to mind, then writing it down. And you can have more in your daily practice regimen, but you want to do this regularly. Have some form of analysis in what you do. Now, when it comes to the importance of having a daily routine, it's very, very easy to fall off the horse because we're humans, not fictional characters. And that's why for us mere mortals, weeks of practice may be required, not of the practice itself, but the practice of getting back on the horse, right? Developing the skill of starting over and over and over again. And that's okay. The key is to keep coming at it until that you find that you eventually have all of your days, or the majority of your days, with fewer and fewer blank spots and more spots where you can look back in your journal and say, I practiced, I practiced, I practiced, I practiced. Interruptions are coming. That's just normal. But here's a suggested daily regime that you can consider and start to practice more or less immediately. And it would involve some form of morning meditation. Now, I would suggest that you get in some kind of memory-based meditation component, and you can read more about those in The Victorious Mind if you like. But at the end of the day, memorize something, and while you're meditating, recite it. And then spend some time every morning memorizing something. It can be more mental content that relates to mental strength, like some of the mantras that I have memorized and share with you, or it can be just getting a deck of cards and doing some, short-term memorization of playing cards in any particular order. And you can even rehearse a deck that you have memorized in the past and go, okay, so what was it? Queen of Hearts, I think. Ooh, yeah. And then Two of Spades, it must be. Yes. And Five of Diamonds, Eight of Clubs, etc. This is a long-term stack that I've memorized for use that I do with magic tricks. But that is a form of recall practice, and it's very, very useful. So balance memorization of something new with the recall of something old. And I do quite a few forms of recall of old things while continually consuming new information. Now, speaking of memorized deck work, or memdeck as it's sometimes called, perform some kind of daily mental calculation. Now, that can be mental math, but my preference is just to spend a bit of time working out where cards are positioned in a deck, and then basically repositioning the deck to work out where they have numerically changed in position. It's very challenging, but it's a good daily workout to do some form of calculation. Now, we already mentioned physical health, so work out physically, and then try to work on some kind of logical exercise. Now, that logical exercise could involve logical puzzle solving, or it could just be working on things like reading about metaphysics. And if metaphysics isn't your bag, you could read ontology. Or if ontology isn't what you're interested in, it could be epistemology. There's many, many different ways to work your mind in an intellectual manner. Another aspect of that is language learning. So language learning, I think, is an intellectual matter because you have to constantly work out, why does this phrase mean what it means? It's so different in English, right? Or in Chinese or in German or what have you. And really, really spending time, like, why do they express things in this way, is not only language learning, but it is a form of logical analysis and study. Then I would suggest having daily offline reading during digital fasting to help heal the brain from constant phasic dopamine spikes and give yourself more tonic dopamine. So that difference is very, very important. You want to have some sort of regular dopamine flow in your brain in order to have focus and concentration. And one way to do that is to get at least an hour or two away from devices like these and more time spent reading with uninterrupted, sustained silence. Very, very good for you. And if you can, get some sort of musical study into your life. And, as I mentioned, keep reviewing what it is that you're learning and writing it out by hand. Capturing it in handwriting is a memory technique. Obviously, you'll want to come up with your own routine, but this is just a suggestion for you. It's basically what I do on a daily basis. And again, there's sometimes blank spots on my calendar, very rarely over the years, but the results, the fruits that I've been able to harvest over years and years of practice, this is the kind of path that leads, maybe not to the mind of a mentat, but a mind that can enjoy so much and think through, without the like-dislike monster getting in the way, all kinds of real issues. Start small, measure your progress, and iterate relentlessly. By this time, 3 months from now and a year from now, you'll be amazed by what you have achieved, all within the bounds of reality. This has been Dr. Anthony Metivier from magneticmarymethod.com. If you would like more about how to fit all this in, get my self-learning blueprint, which is available to you when you watch how to become an autodidact next.